My name is Dr. Sarah Kim, and I learned that in medicine, the biggest obstacles to saving lives often aren't scientific, they're political. After 12 years at Metropolitan General Hospital, I discovered that some people care more about their egos than about breakthrough treatments that could help thousands of patients. I still remember my first day as a resident at Metro Gen, starry-eyed and idealistic, believing that good science and dedication would always prevail. Back then, Dr. James Richardson, our chief of medicine, had seemed like a mentor, someone who encouraged innovation and supported young researchers. I couldn't have been more wrong. The problem started 3 years ago when I began noticing an unusual pattern in our oncology ward. Certain patients with aggressive lymphomas were showing unexpected responses to a combination of treatments we were using. It wasn't in the standard protocols, it was almost an accident, a result of timing and circumstances that somehow produced remarkably positive outcomes. Most doctors would have written it off as a statistical anomaly, but I'd spent my postdoc years studying immunology, and something about these cases caught my attention. Working late into the night, I began mapping out the molecular pathways, trying to understand why this particular combination was working when it shouldn't have been. "You're wasting your time," Dr. Richardson said when I first brought him my preliminary findings. "These are just random positive outcomes. Focus on your regular research projects." But I couldn't let it go. I started spending my own money on lab time, working weekends, carefully documenting every case that showed this unusual response. My husband, Mark, would bring dinner to my office, looking concerned but supportive. "Just be careful," he'd say, knowing how hospital politics worked. "Richardson doesn't like people going against his recommendations." He was right. Richardson had a reputation for shutting down research that didn't align with his own theories or interests. Several promising projects had mysteriously lost funding after their leads disagreed with him in board meetings. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd been running computer models all night, trying to understand the mechanism behind these unexpected recoveries. When the results came in, I had to check them 3 times to believe what I was seeing. The combination therapy wasn't just working by chance, it was triggering a specific immune response that effectively targeted the cancer cells while largely sparing healthy tissue. More importantly, the data suggested this approach could be modified to work for other types of cancer. That's when I made my first crucial decision. I didn't take my findings to Richardson immediately. Instead, I reached out to Dr. Maya Patel, an old friend from medical school who now worked at the FDA. "Sarah," she said after reviewing my data, "this is significant. Have you presented this to your board?" "Not yet," I replied. I wanted an outside opinion first. Maya was quiet for a moment. "Good instinct. This could be huge, but you need to protect yourself. I've heard things about Richardson and MetroGen's research department." Over the next few months, I carefully built my case. During the day, I maintained my regular research projects and clinical duties, but every spare moment went into documenting my findings, running additional tests, and working with Maya to navigate the complex process of drug protocol approval. What Richardson didn't know was that I'd already submitted preliminary applications to the FDA, backed by data from our cases and my molecular research. Maya helped me ensure everything was properly documented and filed, creating a clear record of when each discovery was made. The second breakthrough came in July. A colleague in pathology, Dr. Tom Chen, helped me identify the specific protein markers that predicted which patients would respond best to the treatment. This wasn't just a lucky combination anymore. It was a targetable, reproducible protocol that could potentially help thousands of patients. "Richardson's going to fight this," Tom warned me as we looked at the latest results. "You know, he's been pushing his own lymphoma treatment protocol for years." I knew. Richardson had built his reputation on a more conventional approach to lymphoma treatment. He published extensively on it, given talks at major conferences, and had a significant financial stake in the companies producing the current standard treatments. But I also knew something he didn't. The FDA had already begun fast-tracking my protocol for review. The preliminary data was too promising to ignore. Finally, I couldn't delay any longer. Hospital policy required all major research findings to be presented to the board before publication. I scheduled the presentation for a Thursday morning, preparing myself for what I knew would be a challenging meeting. The boardroom was packed when I arrived. Richardson sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his usual allies. I noticed several representatives from pharmaceutical companies in attendance, companies that had significant investments in current lymphoma treatments. Dr. Kim, Richardson began, his tone already dismissive. I understand you have some alternative theories about lymphoma treatment to present. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out my findings. I showed them the case studies, the molecular data, the protein markers, and the statistical analysis. I explained how this approach could potentially revolutionize not just lymphoma treatment, but other forms of cancer therapy as well. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Richardson laughed, not a chuckle, but a full mocking laugh that echoed off the boardroom walls. "This is absurd," he said, standing up. "You're suggesting that some accidental combination of treatments is more effective than protocols that have been established through years of rigorous research." "The data speaks for itself," I replied, pulling out the survival rates. "Data can be manipulated," he snapped, "and you've been manipulating hospital resources for this fantasy of a breakthrough. Your research is worthless, Dr. Kim. Pack your office. Your privileges at this hospital are suspended pending a full review of your activities." One by one, the board members filed out, some avoiding my eyes, others smirking. As I packed up my presentation materials, I could hear Richardson in the hallway already calling for an audit of all my research files. I sat alone in the boardroom for a long time, looking at the graphs and charts still displayed on the screen. 12 years of dedication, countless late nights, and breakthrough research that could save thousands of lives, all dismissed with a laugh and a wave of the hand. But as I sat there, something else was happening in an FDA office in Washington, D.C. Maya was putting the final touches on an approval announcement that would shake the medical community to its foundations. I pulled out my phone and sent her a brief text. It went exactly as we expected. Proceed with the announcement. Her reply came quickly. "Everything's ready for Monday. Richardson won't know what hit him." As I walked out of MetroGen that evening, I smiled thinking about what was coming. Because Richardson had been so focused on protecting his own protocols, he'd never bothered to check the FDA's pending approvals list. He had no idea that while he was shutting down my research at MetroGen, 3 other major hospitals had already successfully replicated my results in independent trials. Monday morning was going to be very interesting indeed, because sometimes the best way to fight medical politics is to let them think they've won, right before you show them what real science can do. The weekend after my dismissal from MetroGen was the longest of my life. While Richardson's team was busy trying to discredit my research, I worked with Maya and our network of supporters to prepare for Monday's announcement. Every detail had to be perfect. This wasn't just about my vindication. It was about getting life-saving treatment to patients who needed it. "They're trying to access your research files," Tom texted me Saturday morning. Richardson had apparently ordered it to gather all my data, probably hoping to find evidence of manipulation or misconduct. I smiled, thinking about the meticulous documentation system I put in place 3 years ago. Every piece of data, every test result, every case study had been independently verified and backed up on secure servers outside the hospital. More importantly, it had all been included in my FDA submissions, creating an unalterable timeline of the research's development. Sunday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Elizabeth Chen at Memorial Sloan Kettering. "Our independent trial results are ready. The numbers match your findings exactly. Richardson won't be able to dismiss this." I'd met Elizabeth at a conference 2 years ago, right after my first breakthrough. While Richardson was busy trying to suppress my research at MetroGen, I've been quietly collaborating with researchers at 3 major cancer centers, helping them reproduce my results independently. "How many successful cases?" I texted back. 87. All documented, all showing the same protein markers you identified. The response rates are actually higher than your initial estimates. I showed the message to Mark, who had been my rock throughout this entire process. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "Ready for tomorrow?" "More than ready," I replied, thinking about all the patients who could benefit from this treatment. It's time for the medical community to see what Richardson tried to bury. Monday morning, I dressed carefully in my most professional suit and headed to MetroGen. I didn't go to my office. Richardson had probably already had the locks changed. Instead, I went straight to the main auditorium where the hospital held its weekly grand rounds. Right on schedule, at 9 a.m., phones throughout the auditorium began buzzing with the FDA announcement. I watched from the back as doctors and residents pulled out their devices, expressions changing from routine boredom to shock. FDA approves breakthrough lymphoma treatment protocol. The announcement read, multicenter study shows unprecedented success rates. Richardson, who had been reviewing some administrative matters at the podium, noticed the change in the room. "What's going on?" he demanded. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of our senior oncologists, stood up, her phone in hand. "The FDA just approved a new lymphoma treatment protocol," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "Based on Dr. Kim's research." Richardson's face went pale. "That's impossible. Her research was discredited." "Actually," I said, stepping forward, "it was independently verified by 3 major cancer centers. The FDA fast-tracked approval based on the extraordinary success rates in multiple independent trials." The room erupted in chaos. Doctors were frantically reading the announcement, residents were pulling up the published data, and Richardson looked like he'd been struck by lightning. I walked to the podium, pulling up the FDA's detailed release on the main screen. While Metrogen was busy trying to suppress this research, I continued. Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, and Mayo Clinic were all conducting independent trials. All 3 centers reproduced our results with even higher success rates than our initial findings. The data spoke for itself. Slides showing before and after scans, survival rates, and molecular analyses filled the screen. But the most powerful evidence came from the patient testimonials. People who had been given months to live, now in complete remission. "This isn't just about a new treatment protocol," I explained to the stunned audience. "It's about changing how we approach cancer therapy entirely. The protein markers we identified could potentially help us develop targeted treatments for other types of cancer as well." Richardson tried to regain control of the situation. "This is irregular. All research must be approved by the board before." "The research was approved," interrupted Dr. William Foster, chairman of the hospital board, who had just walked in. 3 years ago, when Dr. Kim first submitted her preliminary findings that you, Dr. Richardson, dismissed without proper review. I hadn't expected Dr. Foster to be there. He'd been on sabbatical for the past year, but apparently news of the FDA announcement had brought him back. "Furthermore," he continued, "the board has some serious questions about why promising research was suppressed, and about certain financial relationships with pharmaceutical companies producing competing treatments." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Richardson's face had moved from pale to ashen. That's when the media arrived. The FDA announcement had triggered a flood of press interest, and reporters were already gathering in the hospital lobby. But the real storm was just beginning. By noon, my protocol was the biggest story in medical news. "Revolutionary cancer treatment approved by FDA," read one headline. "Metrogen researchers' breakthrough could transform cancer therapy," said another. But my favorite came from a medical journal that had rejected one of my early papers at Richardson's recommendation. "Suppressed research leads to major cancer treatment breakthrough." The next few days were a whirlwind. I gave interviews, presented our data to other hospitals, and worked with Maya to ensure the treatment protocol would be available to as many patients as possible. Major cancer centers across the country began implementing the treatment, reporting success stories within weeks. Richardson resigned under pressure from the board, though not before trying one last desperate move, claiming he had been involved in the research's development. The documentation I maintained, along with my FDA submissions, quickly put that lie to rest. A month after the announcement, I received an unexpected visit from Janet Martinez, whose husband had been one of our first success cases 3 years ago. "I never got to thank you properly," she said, tears in her eyes. "The doctors told Miguel he had 3 months at most. Now he's watching our grandchildren grow up." That's when the real impact of what we'd achieved hit me. This wasn't about proving Richardson wrong or vindicating my research. It was about the lives we could save, the families who would get to spend more time together. The hospital board offered me Richardson's position as chief of medicine. I declined, accepting instead a role as director of innovative research, with the freedom to pursue promising treatments without political interference. "We need to change the culture," I explained to Dr. Foster. "No more suppressing research because it threatens someone's ego or financial interests. Every potentially life-saving treatment deserves fair evaluation." The changes at Metrogen were just the beginning. Other hospitals started reviewing their research approval processes, implementing safeguards against political interference in scientific evaluation. Medical journals established new peer-reviewed guidelines to prevent established figures from blocking innovative research. Mark helped me establish the Open Research Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting promising medical research that might be overlooked by traditional funding sources. Our first grant went to a young researcher who, like me, had noticed something unexpected in their clinical practice. The hardest part, I told her, isn't the science. It's believing in your observations enough to pursue them, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. A year after the FDA announcement, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at the National Cancer Research Conference. Our protocol had been successfully used to treat over 2,000 patients, with response rates that continued to exceed expectations. The lesson here isn't just about a new treatment, I told the audience. It's about the importance of following the science, even when it leads us in unexpected directions. It's about remembering that every breakthrough treatment started with someone noticing something that didn't fit the established patterns. Richardson, I heard, took a position with a pharmaceutical company, though his influence in the medical community was permanently diminished. The companies that had invested heavily in his preferred protocols faced shareholder lawsuits for suppressing information about alternative treatments. But the real victory came in the form of emails and letters from patients and their families. People who had been told their cancer was untreatable, now in remission. Parents who got to see their children grow up, children who still had their parents, spouses who had more time together. Last week, a young doctor came to my office with an observation about an unusual pattern she'd noticed in her patients. As she nervously presented her data, I remembered standing in Richardson's office years ago, trying to explain my own observations. This is interesting, I told her, watching her face light up with hope. Let's design some trials and see where the science leads us. Because that's what real medical research should be about. Following the evidence, no matter where it leads, and remembering that every medical breakthrough started with someone noticing something that others had overlooked or dismissed. The protein markers we discovered turned out to be even more significant than initially thought. Research teams around the world began finding applications for other types of cancer, leading to new targeted therapies that were more effective and had fewer side effects than traditional treatments. Maya called me recently about another fast-track approval for a treatment based on our initial discovery. You didn't just develop a cancer treatment, she said. You changed how we approach medical research itself. She was right. The ripple effects of our breakthrough went far beyond lymphoma treatment. Medical schools now teach our case as an example of how political pressures can interfere with scientific progress, and how persistence and proper documentation can overcome those pressures. The Open Research Initiative has grown beyond our expectations, funding promising research that might otherwise be overlooked. We've helped develop 15 new treatments in various fields, all because we were willing to look at unusual patterns and follow the evidence wherever it led. Tom Chen, who had helped me identify those crucial protein markers, now leads his own research team at Metrogen. You taught us all something important, he told me at a recent conference. That good science doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from people willing to question the established wisdom. Last month, I received a letter from a teenager named Sophie. Her mother had been one of our early patients, given only months to live. Mom saw me graduate last week, she wrote. The doctors said that would never happen. Thank you for not giving up when they told you your research was worthless. I keep that letter on my desk as a reminder of what we're really fighting for. Because in the end, medical research isn't about publications or prestige or proving people wrong. It's about saving lives, giving people more time with their loved ones, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in medicine. Sometimes I think about that board meeting where Richardson laughed at my research. If he hadn't been so focused on protecting his own protocols, he might have seen the value in what we discovered. But his blindness led to something even more important, a change in how the medical community approaches new ideas and unexpected observations. Now, when I mentor young researchers, I tell them this story. Not to criticize Richardson or celebrate my vindication, but to remind them that real breakthroughs often come from questioning the established wisdom and having the courage to follow the evidence, even when it leads in unexpected directions. Because sometimes the most important medical discoveries don't come from the most prestigious labs or the most powerful researchers. Sometimes they come from people willing to look deeper, think differently, and stand firm when others dismiss their work as worthless. And in the end, that's what matters, not proving critics wrong, but proving the science right, and using that knowledge to save lives, one patient at a time.